Hey everyone, I'm Butu. I use him, his pronouns also, and I live in Burlington, Vermont. I started playing with the Chicago Dragons, and now I play for the non-IGR Burlington Rugby Club. I also coach at St. Michael's College, and I am also a referee. And I just became a World Rugby educator, so hoping to increase the number of certified coaches and referees in the IGR ranks very soon. Thanks for joining.
Nice. And so thanks so much for joining this particular session. My role at within IGR is the Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and I'm helping to operationalize the wonderful plan that Butu has proposed to the trustees based on some awesome work that my colleague Megan and Ben Owens and a few other folks were that kind of helped kind of have this conversation of what diversity and inclusion could look like within IGR. And so, but I want to make sure that this session is fruitful for everyone. And so, I saw that there was a few people who have joined in. I want to be kind of informal. You can look at our plan on our website. I'll make sure to share a link with that. But I'm gonna give it to the attendees just to ask if they have any questions, specific questions about what we're doing before we kind of go on and have some of our like talking points. And so I like to answer your questions first.
Maybe I can just go, Charles, and talk about the genesis of all this work. I see that Baltimore are typing in a question, and while we wait for the question to come up, you know, we embarked on this journey in July of last year, out of a need to update IGR structures. We're on our 20th anniversary, and we've grown exponentially. I think we're close to like 95 teams at this point, and it needs to be updated. Our structures need to be updated, and at the base of all of this is the concept of fair, or the concepts of fairness and justice and inclusion and equity. And in that line, we started a work to bring anti-discrimination policies to every club, continuous education policy to every club, and a grievance mitigation policy to every club, with the understanding, of what IGR can and cannot do, right? And we'll go into all of those details as people ask questions, or even if there are no questions, we can just go into those details. But that was the basis of our work, and we have 14 people on our team from around the world, and two external consultants, um, Alison Burke from Philadelphia and Daniel Yongo from Trinidad and Tobago. And that's, our work has had people in both the northern and southern hemispheres, in Europe, in Africa, in New Zealand, South America, and the United States and Canada. So it's been the most far-flung group of people and the widest work in diversity in IGR. So we're pretty proud of it, and the work isn't done yet, and we're looking forward to the final product.
Yeah, I think something to as people kind of figure out what they're. Oh, here's a question. About a year ago, our team created a D&I committee, but haven't been able to do much beyond social media, considering there was no rugby for a while. Now that we are about to have a real full season, we'll see what the committee can really accomplish. But this is a new endeavor. What do you think a single team IDI committee should be doing? Yeah, I think that's a really good question. The work that we're trying to do here at the IGR level, kind of speaks to what Butu has talked about, was kind of where can we look at within our structure, within our constitutions, within our policies and procedures to really kind of examine what does diversity and inclusion like look like. And to be honest, Not to give, a one size fit all kind of like answer, because there's completely important nuances to like consider. Um, but what I would encourage teams to do, right now, World Rugby has put out that very transphobic policy to ban people who identify as women, particularly trans women, from playing rugby. And so, in terms of like timely things, examine how you can embrace trans people within your club. And I think a really good use is pronouns. And there's some awesome trainings that you can find online about the importance of pronouns. And as that represents and respects our trans family. There are just some like really important things that you can do, and also like support people's understanding of why your team is respecting pronouns. And so um, also some other things that you can do is help us also examine some policy suggestions. uh, you know the committee that we have right now is doing a pilot project, and we're trying to recruit teams to kind of be our like subject matter like experts when proposing a policy like solution for diversity and inclusion as it relates to, what does it look like when an IGR team says something transphobic or racist on the pitch during an IGR related match. We don't necessarily have a formal process, but we need one. And so we have a few folks who are working on a template that we'll be going through. And we would love to have some feedback from like teams um, to make sure that this policy can work at the local level, and that there is some formal structures and procedures on how to address these types of experiences. And so I think those are a few ways that you can do. And so, Butu, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, the two things for me also, right? Baltimore, if when you constitute a committee like that for diversity and inclusion, it's important to give them teeth, right? They have to have the power to give you, and not just give you, but actually for whatever recommendations they make to be adopted, right? I'll give you an example, right? The college where I'm working, I live and work in Vermont, the second whitest state in the country, right? And Vermont was the first state in the country to outlaw slavery in its constitution, right? So they've been at the forefront of what even in the 1700s would be considered progressive causes. But the issue is that who has the power to make those changes, right? If we are if we're going to make an anti-sexist organization, then we men, those of us who identify as men, need to step out of the way and let the women make those changes, right? We need to get out of the damn way, right? So when the DNI committee that you've constituted comes up with proposals, make it known that whatever they propose is going to become the policy of the club, right? It should not be up to the non-DNI people to say, nope, no, that's not going to happen, right? That's one thing. The second thing I'm going to use is this phrase of inclusive planning. Inclusive planning is this idea that if you are going to make a policy for rugby players, then you should have rugby players make that policy, right? They're the ones who should be involved in the design, in the implementation, in the troubleshooting, in the documentation, the oversight, everything, right? If you're going to construct a building for people with disabilities, it's people with disabilities who should be involved in the interviewing and the planning and everything, right? Blind people, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who have mobility issues, people who have environmental allergies, right? People who have PTSD. All of those people need to be interviewed as to what they want to see in that building, what they want seen in that building, and then you design a building that meets all of those requirements. It's the same thing with rugby teams. We need to make sure that if the kind of work that we're doing in IGR is going to affect people from the north in Canada to all the way to Argentina, people in Scandinavia down to Johannesburg, people from Tokyo to New Zealand and Australia, then those people all need to be involved in defining what discrimination looks like, what grievance mitigation and complaints handling looks like, what continuous education looks like, because what seems like oppression in one part of the world may be seen as a very different kind of oppression, or maybe not even seen as oppression in another kind of the world. So we need to make sure that all of those voices are heard, and inclusive planning is the way to go.
Yeah, and there are what I always encourage folks to do when we're especially like inclusive planning, like definitely go online and like read about that. And there's some really good like resources, and I'll make sure to kind of post that for folks here so they can have that resource. But yeah, I mean there are a lot of things that a D&I committee can do. What I just would encourage your team to do is kind of like look out for some priorities, right? And is it, do we have the capacity and the human resources to do everything? Clearly not. But look at your committee and the talent that you have and ask, what are things that we can prioritize, that we can put our time and energy in, and that's going to look different based on like each team. And as you're preparing that work, I think there's sometimes a habit that I think I fall into this, is this culture of like production, that we just need to be producing things every single meeting, every single time. And yes, that is true. But I just really want to encourage folks to embrace that culture of like care and like quality, and that like even doing this work, yes, we want to have a goal of doing it in like 3 months, but doing diversity and inclusion work and shifting people's mindsets is not going to take 3 months. Maybe for some people, but but to do this work, these timelines are going to be continuous, and they're going to like evolve. And so, don't stack too much onto your plate. Do a few things very well and like build on that, and embrace a mindset that everyone has something to learn from each other, and show yourself some grace when you're at a hard spot. There's been times even through this process where I'm like, what am I doing? But there's an awesome team here that has awesome talents, and so just rely on your team, and encourage people to just eat this work one bite at a time. And so I hope that's helpful. Let us know if that's helpful. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask. I did post a link to our website, our micro website on the IGR main page. And so we just posted our August update. And so there's more information there.
I'll use an example of something that just happened today. I coach at St. Michael's College, and my team just arrived today for our preseason camp. So we're going to have preseason camp this entire week, and then the following, from next week onwards, our semester begins. The first thing we did today was identify the values of our team, right? And we do this every fall. And the exercise I have them do is identify 3 ideal behaviors of the ideal St. Mike's rugby player, and then identify 1 or 2 like things that could derail the culture of the team, right? Under 1 or 2 behaviors. And it was amazing, right? We collected all of them, so it is all like you didn't know who wrote what, and we read them. And on the positive behavior traits, we were talking about, this person always picks up his teammate. He respects the opponents and the referees. That came up a lot, and so we were like, okay, so these are the things that are coming up in common, and you identify the culture. Then what do you not want to see in somebody? And again, all these players were like, this person, the things that could derail a team are putting down your teammates, hogging the ball and not passing it, right? Those are the teammates, like getting drunk before a game, like not obeying the college's code of conduct. These are all things that 18, 19, 20-year-olds are coming up with, and you're like, oh, well, there's your team culture right there. And that's something every team, regardless of whether IGR, professional, doesn't matter, should be doing every year. Get your teammates, your returning players, involved in defining what your team's culture and values are. And when they do that, they have ownership. They have a stake in what the team's culture is. And there's nothing that binds them more to your team than them feeling like they have a sense of belonging because they've just defined what this team is all about.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Butu. To speak about kind of the guiding, here, oftentimes you have difficulties attracting some minorities to Rugby 101 despite the targeting efforts. Any suggestions on how to become more attractive? Yeah, I think you would have to make sure you understand the culture of the group that you're trying to like approach. I do public health, community engagement work, and I act as like a public health consultant. So I just kind of help advise, like health departments to how to engage communities. And I think it's always important to understand the social economical kind of conditions that that group is experiencing in your community. I think, when looking at trying to recruit Black folks in Columbus, you have to think about where your field is located. Like, is there transportation? Is it accessible by a bus line? Is that bus line route, convenient? If you're mostly occupying white spaces, you probably are going to attract more white people. And so it's not just putting up a poster in your local NAACP, but how are you showing up at the NAACP and building that relationship and talking to, people who have like that kind of social influence in that community. And so, are you doing volunteer events at the NAACP or even at the local, LGBT, center, or even the Asian, cultural center? I think that's super important. You just can't say, hey, I created a Facebook event and I invited all my Asian friends. Like, no, like you can do that, but really think about building relationships with those communities, and where they show up, and do events where that it's in their location. And so do a rugby event, do a rugby 101 on a field or at a park that's, in the Black community.
Yeah, and it all comes down again to a sense of belonging, right? They have to know that they're not just being recruited to increase the number of minority players on the roster, but they actually are going to have power and a say in how that team is going to run. Gabriel, you'll remember this, right? When we had people from Argentina on our task force, I insisted that we find a translator, and of course, you generously offered to do it. But it's important that now that IGR have teams in Argentina and in Japan, and in countries where English is not the first language, we have to make sure that our services, our meetings, our annual general meeting where people are actually casting votes, are accessible to non-English speakers. And then like that adds the layer. Then I also don't believe people should be working for free, that we need to be paying people for work that they're qualified to do, that they've been trained to do, and that they actually put money into doing and learning how to do. So we have to pay them for that. So all of those things make IGR attractive and accessible to people who are not, who like 10 years ago were not part of our community. So if you bring that to the local level, and a team wants to make itself attractive to minorities, they have to meet that minoritized population, that community where they are. You have to meet people where they are, and that means, having real powerful people on your board who represent that community. So that community is like, oh, okay, we actually belong to this team. That's what people ultimately see. Vermont has no problem recruiting people of color. We have a problem retaining people of color, right? So you don't just want to recruit people, minorities, to a team. You want to retain them over the long term. And the way you retain people is by having them feel a sense of belonging in your state, in your team, and that's the real issue in diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Yeah. I really appreciate that question. And so, because if you're not meeting people where they're at, you're really asking a lot for folks. And so, yeah, in terms of like, okay, park access in LA is extremely limited. You get a field so far in WeHo. LA is a car culture, we organize carpools and players. The irony is that this year we have more players than ever, with almost no publicity since all the gay bars were closed. Yeah, I think there's some really important kind of like considerations to take in, especially in how, is your city a car culture, um, but also, if 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 you want to take diversity and inclusion in another kind of like next level, um, again, just build those relationships with the communities that you're trying to support and invite in. And so, do you have a relationship with trans advocates in your area? Black advocates in your area? You know, I would just really focus on building those relationships and just don't assume that people are going to show up because you put up like a flyer. And everything else you all can like figure out. Like you can figure out the carpooling situation when you have people in. Like people, you all can be really like creative, but just really focus on building those relationships for the communities that you want to be part of your team. All right.
And I was just going to say, this goes back to. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Charles. Please go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say we're at the time limit. So Butu, any last final words?
Yeah, I'm going to jump off quickly. I was gonna say that when Baltimore asked the first question, right? COVID, yeah, a lot of teams, because of our inactivity, we obviously wondered, number one, of whether we would have numbers coming back. But the other thing is that, given that we were inactive, this is the perfect chance for us to build a new, the culture of the team, and really shore up the foundations of all our team culturally, because it's team culture that dictates whether you're successful or not. Not to pick on any teams if you're a fan of this team, but if payroll was all that mattered in winning championships, the New York Yankees and Manchester United would be winning championship after championship after championship because of all the money they spend on payroll. But it is team culture that makes the difference, because as long as you like being around your club mates and your teammates, you can survive any loss on the field, because you will eventually build a winner. It all comes down to team culture.
Yeah.
Folks, I have to jump to the next session. So thanks for thank you, Charles. Thank you, everyone, and I love you guys. And I will see you all later.
Yeah. Y'all take care. Do we just like leave, Gabe, or?
You can keep going. Bhutto and I would probably go to the other session because I need to help setting up. But you can keep going if you have more questions, or it will stop recording. I think at 30 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, bye.
Bye. So if anyone has any other like specific questions, I'll be here. So we have Alex, Greg, and Flora, and Rob. Oh, Larson, Greg, and Rob. Okay, no other questions? All right, Larson, have a good day.